Hi there, it's great that you're able to join us. And I'm really interested to hear from you, Nadine, why you signed the letter that everyone's talking about.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to answer that really important question, Rachel. And thanks to you and your colleagues at Index on Censorship for your staunch defense of free speech. As the letter itself says, and I don't think it is debatable, we are seeing real threats to free speech. I will just focus on the United States, although I know that there are echoes of this all over the world, including in the United Kingdom, but I'll stick to the territory I know best. And sadly, the challenges are coming from across the political spectrum. Donald Trump has initiated a number of direct assaults, including through executive orders that are threatening certain kinds of speech. So that is the classic direct governmental coercive censorship. But in terms of the adverse impact on free speech as a lived reality, we are facing severe suppressive effects from civil society, including in particular from the opposite end of the political spectrum. Now, I have to be very clear about this, that when people engage in calling out or shaming or canceling, they are, or even boycotting is another example, all of which are going on right now, they are exercising their free speech rights, right? They are raising their voices to strongly criticize ideas that they disagree with. And indeed, in the book I wrote 2 years ago called Hate, Why We Should Censor It with Speech, Why We Should Address It with Speech, Not Censorship, I was advocating strong counter speech. So it's certainly something that all of us free speech advocates embrace. But we have to recognize that counter speech can go too far when it has at least the same suppressive impact as outright government coercion. And rather than feeding and nurturing debate and discussion and reply and exchange of ideas, which would be the ideal free speech circumstance, instead, this particular kind of exercise of counter speech has the effect of silencing not only the person who is directly targeted, but also countless, innumerable other people who are subject to a profound chilling effect. So afraid, as every public opinion poll shows, fearful of even addressing, especially the most important topics: race, gender, police, crime, immigration. These are the crucial issues, especially as in my country, we're entering into a presidential election season. It is especially important that people feel free to engage in respectful but robust and highly critical debate. And yet, who would really be willing to do that if you face consequences from losing your job, as has happened even to seemingly well-established and respected journalists and editors with, just impeccable credentials in terms of their commitment to human rights and equality and dignity. And yet they do one thing, agree to publish one letter or one op-ed or so forth that is seen as being insensitive, and that's the end of their careers. As a professor, that's how I earn my living, I am especially concerned about students, because public opinion polls show that students, as well as faculty members, just don't dare even ask questions about what are seen as orthodoxies today. So people may well support the overall goals and thrust of Black Lives Matter, but it's very dangerous to question particular tactics, even with the utmost good faith. we've seen that raising questions about, for example, defunding the police immediately leads to calls of being a racist. And by the way, to draw a distinction between encouraged counter speech versus discouraged and discouraging bullying or shaming and calling out and canceling, I would say one major distinction is that a healthy debate engages with evidence, facts, analysis, right? Whereas the shaming, calling out, canceling tends to be very conclusory, ad hominem, identity-based, designed to end discussion by calling somebody's idea, that's an ist idea or that's an ob idea, and that's to shut down rather than prolong the debate.
How do you see this changing? I mean, what could happen to make this a more positive space, a more engaged space? What would you like to see this change towards?
Well, as I say, my ideal, and I'm sure that of every free speech advocate, is that people would not self-censor any idea or viewpoint for fear that there are going to be tangible adverse repercussions in terms of losing a job, or as has often happened in the United States now, students who have been admitted to universities are having their acceptances retracted. So you're losing your educational opportunity at a young point in your life. I think we have to do everything we can to encourage respectful wording, and whenever possible, if you can express the same idea through language that is seen as not being insulting, and of course do that. That's not only a matter of common courtesy, but it is more likely to result in a genuine, candid exchange of ideas. So we can certainly encourage framing discussions in a certain language that is respectful, but never at the cost of censoring a particular idea. And I really should stress, Rachel, that in terms of the substance of the racial justice protests that are going on now, I could not be more supportive of the overall goal, which is something that I and the organization I long headed, the American Civil Liberties Union, literally since the early 1980s been railing against police abuse and racial discrimination in the criminal justice system at a time when we were like a voice in the wilderness. The Democratic Party under Bill Clinton was moving to the right and becoming far more punitive. The Black Congressional Caucus was in favor of tough on crime laws. So I fully support the goals of this movement. And I believe that it will not succeed unless there is vibrant openness and open discourse and openness to hearing and engaging with different perspectives and even people who reject that goal. So to me, this is not a matter of elevating free speech over racial justice, but it is yet one more example, as I've seen throughout my career, of robust freedom of speech being an essential engine for meaningful racial justice progress.
Some people have described this as a culture war or a generation war. What do you think about that?
I have seen some statistics, survey evidence, and certainly heard a tremendous amount of anecdotal evidence that the younger the generation, the less support there is for the classic concept of free speech, as celebrated probably most famously by John Stuart Mill in On Liberty. And most concerningly, I have seen data and heard reports that this is true even within institutions that have traditionally been committed to freedom of speech, including among journalists, among librarians, certainly among academics, even among civil libertarians. And I take that, I mean, I've learned a lot from the younger generation. Hopefully it's a two-way exchange. From them, I have learned much more vibrantly the adverse power and adverse impact that words can have. So I've learned to be more careful and more respectful, and I'm grateful for those lessons. The lesson I would like to teach, given that I've been around the block, is that you may think that now that you seem to be in the ascendancy, that having the power to decide what should be said and what is unspeakable or unthinkable, that may go to your head. But in a blink of an eye, the political tides are going to turn, and it's going to be your message that is especially endangered.
Do you think there's any particular challenges in the run-up to the US election in this space with the challenges to freedom of expression?
Rachel, realistically, the run-up to this election began the minute after Trump was elected in 2016. It's been a perpetual campaign by him to be reelected, and it's been a perpetual campaign by his opponents to have him replaced in 2020. So I think that's been part of the crucible of the last 4 years, that people see so many consequences, and everybody interprets it differently. Interestingly enough, the Democrats blame social media, which is now really taking, I think, the particular brunt of the beating in terms of they should do more to suppress speech, because that's really the name of the game in terms of the major platform for political and other speech. So those on the left are blaming Facebook for Trump's election, whereas those who support Trump are blaming Facebook and other social media companies for supposedly discriminating against conservative perspectives.
Nadine, thanks so much for outlining your thoughts, and it's really great to have you join us here at Index on Censorship and hear more about what you think the challenges are for free speech ahead.